Hey, what's up, Market Moose? Mike from the Moose on the Loose. I hope you're doing well on this Tuesday. Today, we're going to tackle a different type of topic. We're going to talk about why in the world Alimentation Couche-Tard is labeled as consumer staples and then Dollarama is labeled as consumer discretionary. Or is it the opposite? It's kind of crazy, right? If you look on Yahoo Finance, they say that Couche-Tard is actually consumer discretionary and then Dollarama is consumer staples. And then when you look on TMX, which is running the actual Toronto Stock Exchange market, they actually says the same thing. So both Yahoo Finance and TMX are contradicting me. And if I go on Seeking Alpha, if I go on YChart, if I go on Refinitiv, well, they're all saying that Couche-Tard is consumer staples and then Dollarama is consumer discretionary. So it's kind of crazy. And that leads to a lot of like sector confusion, right? And the point here today I want to make is to dig a little bit further into, yes, Couche-Tard and Dollarama, but you probably saw this problem several times across several companies when you look at your portfolio and probably don't understand why one website is telling you that it's going left and the other one is going right and you're all stuck in the middle. So a lot of sector confusion that we are going to talk about. So first, why is it important? Like why sector labeling, characteristic, diversification matters? Well, of course, diversification matters, like big time, but why? The point of sector diversification is actually not focusing on one sector because one market event, like a big news, like something that is bad could happen to one sector and then creates a domino effect. So if you have, for example, Canadian Bank, Royal Bank, TD Bank, BMO, Scotiabank, CIBC, and National Bank in your portfolio, I mean, yes, you are kind of diversified because you're playing on all those banks, but they're all banks, right? So if there's a mortgage crisis in Canada, what's going to happen? Well, they're all going to suffer pretty much the same way. It's going to be a bad news that will affect all those stocks. So if you have 35% of your portfolio invested in all those banks, well, boom, 35% of your portfolio is going to take the same hit. You don't necessarily want that. I mean, it's the same thing if you want to make a big play on AI and then you have NVIDIA, Broadcom, TSM, Google. They're all driven, Microsoft, they're all driven by the same AI narrative. So if there's an AI bust, all those companies are going to suffer about the same way. So you don't necessarily want that. You want to be playing on different fields. And yes, benefit from great banks, from great AI companies, but you want to have this playground that is a little bit wider so you can have more different company and different business model. And the sectors are helping you putting those characteristics together and understanding the business model. So going back to that example with ATD and Dollarama. So when you think about Couche-Tard's business model, it's probably half and half when you think about that. So on one side, you have a lot of discretionary spending here. So fuel depends on the economy, going to the convenience stores, paying $7 for a bag of Doritos, all discretionary stuff. If I lose my job, I'm going to fuel less. And of course, I'm going to cut down on those Doritos. On the other side, there's also a big defensive play here, consumer staples, where you have a lot of stability, a lot of recurring, the habits, and they're selling more food. So there is a base of, yes, you may have lost your job, but you're still going to put gasoline in your car at one point because you need to drive around, search for another job, and then life goes on as well. So even if the economy slows down, it's not going to completely be destroyed as well. So you have like half and half. On the other side, Dollarama is pretty much the same. You have a lot of growth that is being fueled when the consumer is spending more. And it encouraged Dollarama to open new stores and so on. But on the other side, it's also quite defensive because they're selling cheap stuff. And when the economy slows down, where you're going to probably want to buy cheap stuff as well. So on one side or the other, I would say both websites, financial information, they are all right there. The point here is actually to understand a little bit better and not to spend so much time on that because there's more. There is sectors, but there are also industries, or you could call them subsectors. So that complexify your portfolio as well, because you could show 40% of your portfolio invested in the financial sector, but actually you have banks, you have life insurance companies, you have casualty insurance, and then you have payment processors, and then asset managers. So you could go through 30% into one sector, and if it's well diversified, it's not going to be the same thing. I mean, do you really think that if we have a mortgage crisis like there's a housing bubble and then it crashes in Canada, well, banks are going to be affected. Life insurance? Not so much. Payment processor like Visa and MasterCard? Probably not. Brookfield? BlackRock? ETF? Do you think that like BlackRock will sell less ETFs because there's a housing bubble crash in Canada? I don't think so, right? So being diversified into more industries will help you out. So I thought of ending this show today by talking about a few companies, just to help you understand how you can make sense out of that. And instead of like sticking to the point that like, yes, it should be consumer discretionary or consumer staples, or that doesn't really matter much. It comes back to know what you own and why you own it. So let's take CCL Industry, for example. CCL Industry, they print labels for a lot of brands, and their specialty into like different labels. They also put RFIDs for packaging. So it's all about labels and packaging for their whole business. So you may think it's probably consumer, at least consumer discretionary or consumer staples, not too sure. No, it's actually categorized sometimes into the material business, because on one side, you have the business model. It's all about selling consumer products, right? So if you don't buy like all the Procter & Gamble stuff, for example, well, packaging is not going to work well, and therefore CCL Industry will see their sales going down. But on the other side, the business model, the profitability really depends on the cost of raw materials, which is driven by commodity prices, and therefore it becomes a material stock because the profit is probably more important than the revenue, of course, because you need to make money, and therefore CCL Industry is classified into material. So now we can also argue on pipelines like Enbridge, for example. Is it a utility stock or an energy stock? Because when you think about that, it has a lot of characteristic of a utility company, right? Long-term contract, very stable, providing something that is recurring. So while it sounds like a utility, there's not much difference between me paying Hydro-Quebec every month for electricity than if you're paying to get natural gas from Enbridge, or if Suncor pays Enbridge to run their oil into the pipelines, right? So it's all about recurring, long-term, very stable. But on the other side, it's classified under energy, mostly because Enbridge will depend if there's a high demand for energy over time, over oil and gas. If it's something else, well, then it's not going to work for Enbridge. So you can see that there's some subtlety here between both. But once you know the business model of each of your stock, which is great, is that you can make those combination. For example, you could have CCL Industry and Stella Jones that are selling utility poles and railway ties into your portfolio. They're both into the material sector, but CCL Industries' business model depends on price of commodities, mostly oil, because that drives plastics, right, and other chemicals. And then they're selling consumer products with their packaging business, while Stella Jones is almost seen as a utility business. They're selling utility poles, they're selling railway ties, very stable, very recurring. So you could almost argue there, but it's actually a material company. So then you have those two companies that makes a good mix. Same thing with Enbridge. You could get like Canadian Natural Resources or Imperial Oil that are integrated businesses. You can even add TC Energy at one point. Right now, Enbridge is now more like half oil, half natural gas. But at one point, you could add TC Energy to have more exposure to natural gas than oil. So as you can see, you can create mixes like this that are similar businesses that will increase your exposure to one sector, but will not necessarily destroy your portfolio or put you at more risk. Actually, it's going to be the opposite. You're going to be stronger. So when it doesn't make sense, instead of trying to argue and go back and look into like 5 different investment websites, because you may have like 1 or 2, 3 different answers instead, go back to the business model. Explore why one website is telling you it's one sector and the other, and then you're going to make sense out of it. You're going to improve your understanding of the business model, and you're going to become a better investor because you'll be more hands-on your sectors, your portfolio, and your diversification. So, all right, guys, do not forget that we are getting close to the webinar's date. So on Thursday, September 18th, I will have a free webinar to walk you through earnings, understanding why price goes up, why price goes down after those announcements. You can register at moosemarkets.com/webinar. I'm going to see you there. And tomorrow, we are talking about MSTE debacle. So what's going on with this popular covered call ETF and why it's down 30% from its peak value. So until then, don't forget to stay invested.